This podcast is a Believe Network and Siete production.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce a man that is doing so much in the world of professional wrestling behind the scenes. He is currently the head trainer of Black and Brave Wrestling Academy out in beautiful Davenport, Iowa. And he's also one of the writers of for the Miami Dolphins. He's doing a lot. It's the one and only Marek Brave. Thank you so much for giving his time. How are you, man?
I'm doing well, Derrick. Thanks for having me on tonight. Ready to chat some wrestling, some football, whatever you want to talk about, man.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about, just your discovery of pro wrestling, growing up in Iowa and everything. Where did that love for wrestling start, and how did it originate?
Actually, I was living in Kansas at the time. I did move around a lot as a kid. I've been living in the Quad Cities here, Davenport, Iowa, since 1997. But from 92 to 97, I was living in Kansas, and that's where I began my love with pro wrestling, and it hasn't waned since then. But I had a friend named Brad when I was living in Kansas. He was a next door neighbor of mine. I was 6 years old. And one day he was like, "Hey, do you want to go jump on the trampoline? We can wrestle." And I didn't know what wrestling was, but I was like, "Yeah, sure. I want to go jump on the trampoline with my buddy and have a good time." And when we got on the trampoline, he was like, "All right, I'm the Undertaker and you're Shawn Michaels." And I was like, "Okay." I couldn't picture what an Undertaker was. I didn't know the profession of an Undertaker when I was a kid, so I just pictured this like deep sea diver with this big glass like helmet on or something like that.
Right.
Undertaker under the water. I don't know. I was a 6-year-old. Don't ask me why, but we did that for a little while. It was fun, and then we went back to his house, and he was like, "Hey, let me put on some wrestling VHS tapes while we look at the old school black and white wrestling magazines." And I found out what the Undertaker was, or who the Undertaker was, very quickly. Very different than what I had pictured, but I fell in love with pro wrestling that day, and here we are 32, 33 years later, and I still love it just as much as I did back then.
It's crazy. And I wish I had the outlet of trampolines when I was growing up, because I fell in love with wrestling in 82. I'm a little older. Yeah.
Well, you don't look older at all. I thought you were younger than me, man. Congratulations.
My birthday was on the 7th. I turned 46, man. So
wow.
Yeah, so I fell in love with wrestling because back in North Jersey where I lived, I got the WWF, Georgia Championship Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic, AWA, and World Class. So I was able to see all of that stuff, and Flair was the first professional wrestler that I ever saw, and he was cutting a promo. And that started my love. So I'm over 40 years in being a fan and, 6 years being in the business as a ring announcer. And just to meet with somebody like yourself who's been doing this for quite some time, and we're going to get into some of your stuff is how you got involved in wrestling. And again, it's an honor and a privilege for me to have you on. So at what age did you decide, to get in the business of pro wrestling as far as training?
Well, that's interesting. I started wrestling my senior year of high school. So I was 17 years old, started wrestling on shows in front of a live audience. I wouldn't say I was fully trained at that point. I had done a lot of day camps where I would go and do 3 hours, 4 hours with some professional guys, some well-known individuals. Shane Douglas was one, Samoa Joe was another, and the list goes on and on. But after I graduated high school in the summer of 2004, it was then that myself and my business partner Seth Rollins, who wrestled as Tyler Black back then, but I just know him as Colby, so you might hear me call him any number of those things.
Right.
But after high school, we just decided, hey, let's take this to the next level. Let's go through a full-on course. Let's get essentially our certification, and then let's start traveling the country. And instead of just doing this here in our hometown, let's see if we can make names for ourselves. So I had my first match in August of 2003, but I went away for my official pro wrestling training in October of 2004, finished up in December of 2004, and just immediately got to it. Started wrestling for IWA Mid-South in February of 2005, and that
Ian Rotten, right?
Yes, sir. And
Mhm.
back then IWA Mid-South was filled with the top independent talent in the country. You had Alex Shelley and Jimmy Jacobs and Chris Hero and CM Punk and Colt Cabana and all those guys.
Chris
AJ
Hero.
Styles was on a number of shows, and we it was trial by fire, right? It was sink or swim. It was either you can hang with these guys or you can go back to the local spot back where you're from and do this once a month if you feel like it. But if you really want to make names for yourself, this is the place to do it. And thankfully, we were able to have good matches with those guys. We learned a lot from them, and we continued on from there.
When I think about that time, and it was a nice segue to the next question, because when I think about the early to mid 2000s, when those names you mentioned, Joe, Punk, Dragon, Chris Hero, Colt Cabana, the list goes on and on, like, the machine guns that, you were talking about, that style, that when we say the indie style, whatever the case, it was just fast paced. And it was the oohs, the ahs, but it was incredible, incredible wrestling. I got wind of the indies in the late 90s with guys, like Reckless Youth. That was
Yeah.
that was like my guy.
Yeah.
That was like my indie guy that I
Yeah,
hung on to.
especially from where you're from as well.
Absolutely. And I learned about him in PWI with the APTA magazines, where I was able to kind of catch wind. Talk about the indies in that era, and like I said, and that inspiration for you and on those guys you look to at that time.
Well, I often tell people if you were a part of independent wrestling back then in the mid 2000s, you were really passionate about professional wrestling. You had to love professional wrestling at its core to have any involvement in indie wrestling back then, whether you were a performer, a promoter, or even just a fan of independent wrestling. And I started out as a fan of independent wrestling in 2002, 2003, before
Right?
I got into it. But it wasn't popular. Wrestling was
No,
not at its
mm-mm,
height
not
like
at
it is
all.
now. I think wrestling's more popular now than it ever has been. But it was not popular back then. And it wasn't uncommon for us to be wrestling in front of 10 people or less. Even on show, I remember being on a show with Eddie Kingston and Seth Rollins and myself and Jimmy Jacobs and Cesaro and we wrestled in front of 6 people in South Bend, Indiana, where Notre Dame plays football, which is relevant to this story because this show was booked on Notre Dame's homecoming game against USC that was happening that same night. So you could count them. There were 6 people in the
Oh my
audience,
God.
and some of these guys on this show they'd go on to be some of the most legendary pro wrestlers out there today. So you really had to love professional wrestling, independent wrestling, to be involved in independent wrestling in the mid 2000s. But it was, in a way, I'm nostalgic for those days. Obviously, with it being as popular as it is now, I'm able to make my living off of pro wrestling at the
Mhm.
Black and Brave Wrestling Academy, which I'm sure we'll get into. So it's great for me. It's worked out great for me. But it was kind of cool to know that everyone around you on those shows, again, whether you were a performer, a promoter, or a fan in attendance, everyone around you at that moment loved this business with everything they had and would do anything just to be a part of it. And we did. The drives were long, the pay was low. You were wrestling in rings that were less than professional quality, if
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
to put it lightly. And you loved it, and you loved it, and you did it, multiple days every week, and then you'd go out the next week and you would do it again. So I definitely I have just a romantic nostalgia of the early to mid 2000s independent scene.
Definitely, man. So you mentioned them, talking about Seth Rollins, Tyler Black, or you call him Kobe, and you formed a tag team with him, the Black and the Brave, and ultimately you named your school after that. Talk about just briefly how you two met, and as far as how did the tag team thing come along as well?
Sure. Well, we both live here in the Quad Cities. I actually lived in a suburb of Davenport called Bettendorf, and I went to high school at
Okay.
Bettendorf, and he went to a different high school at Davenport West. So we didn't know each other through school or anything. We didn't grow up together. But when we were 16 years old, we were both waiting in line for tickets to a SmackDown taping. We used to do the
Okay.
thing where we'd go spend the night with our friend group so that we could be guaranteed to get front row seats, at least first or second row
Right.
seats to
Right.
these
Right. Right.
shows. And so me and my friend group showed up probably around 10 o'clock at night, the night before, and we were the second group in line. The first group in line was Colby and his friend group from his high school. And when we showed up, those guys were doing all sorts of crazy flips and wrestling moves to each other in the wood chips out in front of this arena, in the grass and everything. All the stuff you're not supposed to do, but we all
Hmm.
did when we were teenagers anyways, just because it was fun. And we
Right.
were like, me and my friends were like, wow, those guys are really cool. We should get to know those guys. And so we start talking to them. Colby tells me about this local, essentially, it was a backyard wrestling group, but a little more advanced than most backyard wrestling groups. There was a real ring and everything like that. And he told me, hey, you should check these guys out. We wrestle for them sometimes. I think yeah, the show that we would attend was held in a barn, in an actual barn. I mean, that's Iowa for you, but it was held
Right.
in a barn, and tickets were, I want to say, $2 a piece to get into that one. So we showed up the
Wow.
next weekend, we watched it, and me and my friends were like, this is awesome. These guys are cool. Let's get in good with them, and then maybe we can eventually wrestle for this company. Side note, this company would transform into the independent company that I've been running for the last 15 years. I took it over 15 years ago, but yeah, that we met waiting in line for WWE tickets, and little did I know that one day he would be a multi-time WWE World Heavyweight Champion. Although if you asked him back then, he would have told you absolutely that's in his future.
Yeah, because there was a stigma back then that guys, when you talk about the Punks and the Danielsons and the Rollins and all these guys that were I think, as they say, they would say indie darlings, they used to say back in the day. No one ever thought that that was even possible
Correct. Yeah.
because the WWE, the WWF, especially when I was growing up, was the land of the giants. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? You didn't really see smaller guys, but I thought Bret Hart kind of opened the door a little bit. Shawn
Sure.
Michaels kind of opened that door a little bit. And then
Yep.
of course they went back to more of the much bigger guys and everything. But I appreciate the fact that a guy, Seth, and I've seen Seth perform so many times and when he was the WWE champion as well, to see him perform at the level that he's performed at, it's inspiring to prove the naysayers wrong that no matter what your size is, it doesn't matter. If you have the work ethic and if you have the it factor, you can go as far as you want to go.
Yeah, and he's definitely always had both of those things, Even when we met when we were 16 years old, I was like, there's something about this guy. Like you said, that it factor.
Hmm.
He seems like a cool dude. Like I want to hang out with him. I want to be friends with him,
Right.
which
Hmm.
obviously translates to being likable in a pro wrestling ring. But the other part of your statement is probably even more important, and that's the fact that he works harder and continues to work harder at the age of 38 after being in this business for 21 years. He works harder than anyone I've ever met in my life. He'll get back from a flight from Saudi to New York with a layover in Chicago and then back down to where we live in the Quad Cities. And the first thing he does is go to the gym. He doesn't even stop at his house to drop his bags off. He just drives straight to the gym so that he can get a workout in. And to me personally, I'm like, man, that's crazy. Go take a nap, dude. Like you've earned it. You've deserved it.
Right, right, right,
But
right, right.
for him, he's like, no, why would I do that? He's like, I've been sitting down on an airplane for however many hours. I need to get in the gym and get my body moving and get a lift in and get some cardio in. And it's just that mindset that sets him apart from 99% of professional wrestlers out there. And I do think that his success is a large part due to the fact that he has this very strong work ethic.
100%. So I know the both of you, and eventually, you had an incredible career in the ring. But the both of you opened up the Black and Brave Wrestling Academy in Davenport. What led to the both of you deciding to say, "Hey, it's time to give back to the next generation"?
Sure. Well, you mentioned my career. It was cut short due to a pretty catastrophic neck injury. I ended up
Right,
having to
absolutely
get
right.
double level spinal fusion surgery on my neck due to an injury I suffered actually in a Ring of Honor tryout match, tag team match, myself and Rollins versus the Briscoe brothers.
Hmm.
And these things happen, injuries happen, and unfortunately, it cut my in-ring career a little shorter, at least kind of derailed my path to superstardom. But as I was kind of getting back out there, it took me a little bit of time, about a year and a half. I took off to kind of rehab my injury and get myself back in a good spot. And as I was doing that, I was like, well, I still love wrestling. I still want to be involved. Maybe I can train some future wrestlers. So I had a couple classes here locally in Davenport, just by myself, just with a few local guys that wanted to learn. And I was teaching them, and this was at the point where Rollins was signed to his developmental deal in NXT, and he would always text me and be like, "Oh, how are those classes going? How are the new guys doing?" And quite frankly, and this is no shade to the people in those classes, but I was a little frustrated with how things were progressing, maybe a little bit slower than I would have liked. And I was telling him about that, and he's like, "Well, I'll tell you what, when I get called up to the main roster, what if I move home to Iowa and we start a wrestling school together?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure, that sounds like a good time," not thinking it would ever happen. First of
Right.
all, I didn't know if he'd ever get called up to the main roster. He never knew if he'd get called up to the main roster. Sometimes that just doesn't happen.
Ain't true.
And also, in professional wrestling, like a lot of avenues in life, most of the stuff that you talk about doesn't end up actually happening. So, yeah, sure, we can open a wrestling school together someday. That'll be cool. Well, fast forward, I'm talking maybe 3 or 4 months. The Shield debuts on pay-per-view. Was it Survivor Series?
Survivor Series 2012. Yes.
Yeah, and he didn't tell me ahead of time. He kept that a surprise. So I see him come out on TV, and I'm like, oh crap, he got called up to the main roster, and it seems to be in a very impactful way. So this is good for him. And then about a month later, he texted me and he was like, "Hey, we're gonna do that wrestling school thing. Let's start it next summer." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So we spent about 6 months organizing that, getting all of our ducks in a row, and I ended up dropping out of college. I had gone back to college at the time for teaching, so it ended up working out well. I got to use a lot of the techniques I learned while going to college for an elementary education degree, and I was able to use that, combine that with my passion and knowledge of pro wrestling, and become the coach that I am today. But yeah, it was about 6 months after he had gotten called up, or I guess it was closer to 9 months after he'd gotten called up to the main roster when we opened the Black and Brave, and we've been at it for over 10 years now. So it's pretty incredible.
That's amazing. And one of the things I wanted to talk about when speaking of Black and Brave is what are some of the intangibles that you look for a potential, student that's looking to get in? What are some of those things you look for when
Sure.
someone's applying to the school?
Yeah, so a lot of people are concerned when they apply. They're, "Oh, I'm not the tallest person out there," or maybe I'm
Hmm.
a bit overweight, or maybe I'm a bit too skinny, in their own minds. And I always tell people wrestlers come in all shapes and sizes, right?
Agreed.
All different packages, all different walks of life, different backgrounds. We've had people come and get their first training with us in their mid 40s. We've had people come and show up 2 days after they turn 18 years old. We've had people who are 110 pounds soaking wet, and we've had people that are well over 300, closing in on 400 pounds, come in and be successful with our program. So it's not about that. What I look for is somebody who's passionate about professional wrestling and who has a certain intelligence level, right? I want you to be able to understand the nuances of pro wrestling. We our course is difficult, not just physically, but mentally as well. We really get into the psychology of pro wrestling and how to maybe this sounds bad, but how to emotionally manipulate an audience to make them feel how you want them to feel. And that's not
Agreed.
for nefarious reasons. That's because that's show business,
It's
right?
show 100%.
This is entertainment. If we want you
Hmm.
to laugh, we need to know how to do that. If we want you to cry, we need to know how to do that, and every other emotion in between. So it's a very strenuous program mentally and physically, and so I need you to have a certain intelligence level to be able to succeed here when doing that. So we actually have all of our applicants write a short essay about why they want to be a pro wrestler, and in that essay, I can discern your intelligence level there. So we tend to pick people who we believe are passionate and have a certain level of intelligence, because we feel those are the people who make the best pro wrestlers. And I think throughout the last 10 years, we've done a really good job of finding the right people that not only we want to train, but we feel can give back to the independent wrestling community, just like we have over the last 10 years.
Yeah, when you talk about, as far as success stories with your school, I mean, you hear a few names, obviously there was a guy named Ben Carter who's now known as Nathan Frazier down at NXT, TNA knockout Heather Reckless, and there's Zicky Dice, and the list goes on and on. Talk about the pride and joy you have as a trainer, seeing your students flourish in the business of pro wrestling.
I mean, that means the world to me as somebody who's kind of winding down their in-ring career. I still get out there a handful of times a year. I would definitely not say that I'm a full-time performer, but I can still do it mentally. The body's breaking down a little bit. The knees are
Hmm.
getting old. The
Hmm.
neck, obviously, with the surgery isn't great. But so a lot of the times I get to live vicariously through my students, and watching them succeed helps me feel like I've succeeded because I have as a trainer who has taken them, the people you mentioned, they had never stepped foot in a pro wrestling ring before they came to our school. So I literally took them from somebody who had no knowledge of the professional wrestling business and got them
Right.
to a point where now they can make a living off of the professional wrestling business. So to watch their successes and even the ones who haven't made it to TV yet and haven't signed contracts yet, just to see
Mhm.
them live out their dream and be a part of a business that they grew up loving just the same way I did. To me, that's a great accomplishment, and it really makes the job worthwhile.
Definitely. I mean, again, I've actually, and again, I'm not a wrestler. I'm just a ring announcer, but I have a similar story in regards to people that I taught in the marching percussion arts because I'm actually a drummer. I marched in the drum and bugle corps activity for 15 years, and seeing three of my students end up marching in a drum corps that I actually got cut from 3 times,
Oh wow.
but saw my kids make it. And again, I don't take credit for it, but it was just a pride and joy. And them telling me, yo, D, thank you so much for everything. And it's just like, yo, you did the work. But the fact that I could just sit back and say, wow, they did it. You know what I mean? So I,
Yeah.
I definitely get that from a different angle, obviously, in a different world. But it's all relative. At the same time, it's education. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying? And you having the educational background, going to college for it, and being able to apply those skills into what you're doing as a trainer in pro wrestling.
Yeah.
But it was just announced recently that WWEID and the Black and Brave is now attached to that. I just want to say first and foremost, congratulations to
Thank
you
you very
and to
much.
your business partner on that because obviously you're doing something right. When you're getting WWE saying, hey, we want you to be a part of our affiliate program. Talk about, I don't want to get into the information in regards to how it all happened. That's not none of my business, but just your reaction when you heard that news.
Well, this really is a thing that was a long time in the making. About 8 years ago, I had the privilege of guest coaching down at NXT for a week. And
Hmm.
towards the end of my guest coaching stint, I actually got pulled aside by Triple H, and he was telling me about some plans he had to kind of help out independent wrestling and shine a light on independent wrestling. And he was not in charge like he is now. Obviously,
Right,
his status within the company has grown over the last 8 years. So
for sure.
it was just some ideas that he was hoping to flesh out in the future. And it wasn't exactly what it is now, but similar enough. So throughout the years, you've seen little things being implemented here there. But as far as this being announced, it was actually a relatively quick process. Just a few weeks ago, well, I would say about a year ago, we had a talent scout from WWE come to our school and watch 20 of our guys and girls get in the ring and have practice matches. And we gave them a tour and showed them around the facility. And they were highly impressed with not only our facility and what we do, but the things that we emphasize in our training really aligned with the things that WWE emphasizes in their training down in NXT, which makes sense. Obviously with Rollins being a major WWE superstar, and then
Definitely
myself
right.
going down to NXT for a week, I got to see, hey, this is how they do things. Why don't I bring that back to Black and Brave and we can implement some of that into our training? So they were impressed with what we did. Fast forward a year later, they approach us about this WWE ID program. And basically, the program is all about shining a light on independent wrestling, whether that be wrestling schools, and now you're seeing individual talents being recognized. And I do believe the plan in the future is for independent wrestling organizations to be spotlighted and highlighted as well. And the idea is giving back to the independent community.
Hmm.
Triple H came from the independents. I don't think a lot of people realize that, but he started out as an independent wrestler way back in the day before signing with WCW and then eventually WWF. So he has a soft spot in his heart for independent wrestling. He has an affinity
Right.
for independent wrestling. So, and don't get me wrong, I've seen the naysayers out there and the skepticism online. People are concerned that this is going to be a negative thing in the long run for the independents. But from what I was told and what I've seen in contracts and different things like that, this really will turn out to be a very positive development for independent wrestling. And, I think 6 months from now, people are going to look back and they're going to feel silly about being so skeptical about it. And they're really going to see the benefits that this program does provide for independent wrestling.
You know, I envision, and this is just me, being a sports fan, and we'll get to some sports stuff in just a second, but the WWE actually having an actual annual draft from wrestlers all around the independents, including the NIL people as well, literally holding a draft.
That'd be
I
wild.
think, I mean, because you're talking about from every wrestling school around the country and around the world. Think about how big that could be.
Yeah, no, it absolutely could be. And the program is in its infancy right now. So things
Hmm.
that are part of the program today may not be part of the program 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, a year from now. The
Right.
program will change and grow and develop just like any program does. Anything that is being worked on and developed, just like it. When we opened our school 10 years ago, we did things 10 years ago that we don't do now because we realized, okay, some of this stuff can be tweaked to be made better. So I'm sure the
Agreed.
program will grow and change and morph into something that it isn't completely that now. You know what I mean? But we'll see where it goes. But I think it is a good thing for independent wrestling. I'm excited to be a part of it, to get that stamp of approval on the training that I've helped develop over the last 10 years. That felt pretty cool for me. And anytime you can get a global giant like WWE to say, "Hey, you're doing things the right way," that feels good.
That's a good thing, man. Like I said, congratulations to you,
Thank you.
Seth, and everybody else involved. Let's talk about football. You're a huge, huge Miami Dolphins fan.
Yes,
We've had
sir.
a couple of back and forths because I'm a division rival Patriots fan.
Yeah.
Let me just say this. I hate football just as much as Seth does right now. Although I love it a little bit more because we did beat the Bears yesterday. We're
You sure
taping on a
did.
Monday night, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk about that you are a writer for Phinsider and talk about how you became a writer for Phinsider.
Well, that's crazy, right? So, I've been a Miami Dolphins fan for just as long as I've been a professional wrestling fan. So, well over 30 years at this point. And, I'm on Twitter, I'm on social media. I follow Dolphins writers and all that stuff. I try to get as much information as possible about the team. I am an absolute diehard. I got a Miami Dolphins tattoo on my body, so
There you go.
they're with me for life, for better or worse. And as a football fan, it's usually worse when you're a Dolphins fan. It's bad for you guys now as Patriots fans, but the prior 20 years up prior to these last couple, that
We'll
was a pretty
never
good
see
run
that.
for you.
We'll never, and we'll never see it again. We'll
No.
never see it again. That will never
So,
happen again.
yeah, you guys, the Patriots and Tom Brady ruined my entire adult football watching life. So, although no team beat Tom Brady and the Patriots more than the Miami Dolphins did, so we gave him a run
Very,
for
very
his money.
true.
Uh,
Absolutely.
no championships to show for it, but it is what it is. But
Right.
no, so I saw online that one of the guys I followed, he ran a website and he was hiring and looking for a writer, and I was kind of looking for a hobby and something to do. And I've always been an avid writer. It was something I started doing in high school, and I had a kind of a knack for it. So I said, you know what? I want to have a good time. I want to have fun. Let me throw my name in the hat. Well, this guy also happened to be a wrestling fan, so he knew who I was when I reached out to him, and he told me, "Oh, my favorite wrestler is Seth Rollins." So I think I kind of had the in there. So
There you
I got
go.
hired by this guy. I ended up writing for him for a year, and then I think he didn't really want to run his website anymore, but he was like, "Hey, I know a bigger website that is under the SB Nation umbrella that looks to be hiring, and I could put in a good word if you're interested." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, let's do that." So he put in a good word. I ended up getting a couple interviews with them, sending in a writing sample, and they were like, "All right, dude, you're hired. You're on the team." And that was, oh God, probably 3 or 4 years ago, and that's the Phinsider, Phinsider, the Phinsider.com. And I write multiple articles for them a week, including my famous good, bad, and ugly article that I do after every Miami Dolphins game, which does happen to be the number one article on the site right now. So I am thankful for that.
That's awesome, man. So I know, like I said, we're recording on a Monday night, ladies and gentlemen. I know this, well, by the time you listen to this, it'll be a Thursday morning. But as of right now, they are sitting at 2-6. In your opinion, what's the trajectory in reality? We could look at, the fandom, and then we could look at, okay, reality. What's the trajectory for this team as we get closer towards the end of the season, and how do you see it playing out?
Well, we're less than 20 minutes away from a big Monday night football game against the Los Angeles Rams that's really going to kind of determine that. I think if the Dolphins win tonight, they go to 3-6. The next two games are against the Raiders and your Patriots, which, forgive me for saying, they're not world beaters. Those are very, very winnable games. If the Dolphins
Yeah.
can win tonight and then the two after that, they'll be 5-6 heading into a Thanksgiving night game against the Green Bay Packers, which should be a tough one. But if somehow they can miraculously pull that one off, now all of a sudden they're 6-6 going into the home stretch, and in an AFC that's having a bit of a down year, they might be able to contend for one of those last couple wild card spots
Wild card, yeah.
if they can put it together at the end. And you know what? If they can put it together at the end, it's because they're playing good football. It's because they're beating good teams on the road. It's because they're going into cold weather situations and getting victories. Two things that the Dolphins have struggled with under the Mike McDaniel regime. So if they can do those things and they can be playing their best football and somehow get into the playoffs as a sixth or a seventh seed, then they might be able to do some damage. And by do some damage, I mean at least win a playoff game for the first
Right.
time since I was a sophomore in high school. That's how long it's been since the Dolphins have won a playoff game. We're talking January 2001 here. So that would be great for our fan base. That would be great for this team. But it all starts tonight. And for you people listening to this out there, you'll know if it happened or not. Did the Dolphins beat the Rams? I don't know. I hope so. We'll see though.
But there was a rumor out there, and I want you to put it to bed because you are closer to the action than most because you're a part of the writing team for the Dolphins. There was a rumor about a potential trade sending Tyreek Hill back to the Kansas City Chiefs. Any validity to that story, or that was just rumor and innuendo?
I don't think so. I think that was speculation. Maybe Chiefs fans wanting it to happen, or just football fans or fantasy football fans in general hoping
Hmm.
that happened. The Chiefs ended up trading for DeAndre Hopkins of the Tennessee Titans, and so I think
Right.
that kind of gave you all the info you needed to know there. But no, Tyreek Hill, at least for right now, he's a Miami Dolphin. He's dealing with a little bit of a wrist injury. He's going to give it a go tonight on Monday Night Football. If they lose, I wouldn't be surprised to see them shut Tyreek down for the rest of the year so that he can go get season-ending wrist surgery. I hope that doesn't happen. I own him on my
Uh,
fantasy team, and I was waiting for Tua to get back so they could start lighting it up again. Still hoping for that. Maybe that can happen tonight. But it's an aging team and an expensive team right now. They're going to have to cut costs somewhere, and maybe Tyreek Hill is one of those costs that they cut in the off season. But they didn't
mm.
trade him. He's here at least for this year. I would venture to say he'll be here next year as well, but I wouldn't be entirely surprised if they can get a good return on him. First round pick, maybe a couple second round picks instead. I could see them possibly doing a deal in the off season.
Wow, like I said, when I first saw that, I'm like, there's no way. Like, like the Kansas City Chiefs would have to give up so much capital,
Yeah.
whether it's draft picks, cash compensation, whatever it might be. And I'm just like, I had to ask and go to the source. And that was
Sure.
one of those questions that I had ready for you because I know you're an insider. You understand what's going on inside, inside the locker rooms and that type of thing. But you brought up fantasy football. I lost fantasy football on Thursday night because I was facing Jamar Chase.
Jamar Chase, yeah. 55 points,
60.
55.4?
It was 60. It was 60 in my
in
league.
your league. Wow.
60 in
Yeah.
my league. I knew I was toast. I
That's a tough
I said,
beat.
yeah. I was like, it happens, right? So because I know you got to go on a little bit, but for people that are looking to apply to your wrestling school, how can they go online and apply?
Well, you can head to blackandbravewrestling.com and fill out an official application. I will recommend you do it soon, though. Obviously, with the recent announcement, we've had a great surge in applications as of late. Right now, our earliest opening, we have all classes completely filled up until September of 2026. So we're looking at
Wow.
almost a 2-year waiting list right now. So get in there. We have a few spots left in that class. Blackandbravewrestling.com. Fill out your application. Cross your fingers that you get one of the last spots. Otherwise, we will be announcing our 2027 classes probably at the beginning of this upcoming year, 2025. So definitely an extensive waiting list. But if you're looking to train with the best, we got them. This is the spot you want to be at.
And also, where can people follow you on social media?
Sure. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at mbrave13. I do not have a Facebook. I've actually never had a Facebook. That was something that I decided many years ago. I didn't want to get one of those. I was a big MySpace guy.
Same here.
And
So my face.
when Facebook took over, I was stubborn and I said, I'm not getting one. And I've stuck to my guns. So Twitter and Instagram at mbrave13. You can follow Black and Brave Wrestling on Twitter at Black and Brave and on Instagram at Black and Brave Wrestling.
Well, Marek, again, this is an honor and a privilege for me, like I said, to have you on to talk a little wrestling, a little football, and in this life in between. Again, thank you so much. You will always be welcome to come back on the D-Lew Podcast anytime you so desire.
Thank you, Derrick. Appreciate you having me on tonight.
You got it.